So, so I'm going to start by talking about what is, I would say my favorite novel. My favorite novel is Don Quixote. And I don't read too many novels, so Don Quixote is actually pretty low in the ranking of my favorite books. But as a novel, Don Quixote is my favorite. And the first time I read it all the way through was in high school, and I got the chance to read it because very early in the day, I got sent to detention for wearing a Cannibal Corpse t-shirt that I didn't want to take off, and so I just got to read Don Quixote without having to do any classwork. Detention rocks. When I was in high school, I would blow off at least one class a day just to read. I would go to class, but I would just sit there and read, and nobody would say anything about it. I am actually often surprisingly very quiet. But for those who don't know, Don Quixote is a long book, about 1,000 pages long, and I'm pretty confident it was written in 17th century Spain by a man named Miguel de Cervantes. I probably fucked up the pronunciation. But this book is probably the only reason why I would want to know Spanish, and I've toyed with thinking about, is it itself worth it? And I don't think so, because I'm not really sure that I approve of Cervantes as an author, because he cheated on his wife, and I will explain more about why that is a problem for me. But I do love the book. Yes, because it's funny, but also because I think of Don Quixote as being admirable in many ways, and I think that the book, contains a lot of helpful life lessons. But for those who don't know, it's about a middle-aged man, and he spends all of his time reading books about knights and chivalry, which are also books that I love, and I will probably talk about them in the future, unless it's just clear to me that nobody wants to hear me ramble about my books. But so he spends all of his time reading books about knighthood and chivalry, and one day he decides that he is going to go out into the world and become a knight-errant, a wandering knight who goes around righting wrongs and serving his lady Dulcinea del Torbosco. And another feature of the book that I like is you can just sort of kind of pick it up and read at any point, because it's a series of disconnected adventures, mostly ending in Don Quixote getting beaten up. I think that one thing that often comes out to me when reading the book is, even if it might not be what the author intended, but it's certainly how I read it, is that, what he tries doesn't work out, but I think it's his intention that's important. And I think that the book often offers a lot of illustrations and ways to think about it, but also, advice on how to be careful when going about things. But I often, find myself thinking about things I do in life and saying, yes, this is what Don Quixote would do, and I don't necessarily consider that to be a bad thing. My therapist actually once compared me to Don Quixote, and I was not insulted, and I saw that as being a positive, and I think that kind of derailed the entire therapy session from that point onward. But I said that I didn't like Don Quixote as much as I could, partly because Cervantes cheated on his wife. And it's not just a matter of me trying to cancel Cervantes or anything like that. It's not just, you need to separate the artist from the art types of situation. And a lot of musicians, they do things that now I don't especially approve of, but it's not as personal as, say, literature is. For me, I'd like to contrast Cervantes with J.R.R. Tolkien. I have never in my life heard a bad thing about Tolkien, and if I did ever hear a bad thing about him, I would cry, and I would stop believing in fairies and magic. Tolkien is, to all appearances, a good dude, and I wish I could be a good dude like Tolkien was. I don't know what makes dudes into bad dudes, but I like to imagine that there is something that I can do in my life right now to make sure that I'm not a bad dude. And largely that to me comes through books, and maybe I'll talk about this later, music. But I like to imagine that Tolkien knew something that prevented his bad dudeness, and that if I just read his books, maybe I can learn that something too. At one point in time, I actually wanted to move to Okatania, or at least go visit Occitania in French, or in France, because I wanted to be a troubadour. And I was even learning how to ride the unicycle, and I was learning how to juggle, because I figured, well, maybe that was just part of what made them so good at writing poetry. But, when I looked at it, it was kind of honestly unsettling to me how much troubadour poetry is just writing about other men's wives. And, famous author, I'm sure he's a great author, T.S. Eliot. I've read some of his stuff, but, just reading about his life, like he was kind of beating his wife, and then at one point he admitted her to a mental institution, not because she needed to be there, but because he wanted to marry his girlfriend that he had on the side from his wife. And I guess, it's not that literature is bad, but I guess I'm just looking at these people's lives. I guess I'm wondering, how being great at literature or music has helped them. I used to be much more into the literary and musical side of things, but you can be a great, writer and a great musician and be a kind of awful person, at least by my standards, very much not a person that I want to be. Like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, I'm sure that they've reached the peak of their art, but I wouldn't want to be them by any means. I still read Nietzsche on mostly a daily basis, especially I liked reading The Antichrist. But at one point, I don't remember when, Nietzsche gave Goethe and Napoleon as examples of the Übermensch, and that is not something that I want to be at all. I can't admire a Goethe. I have mixed feelings about this, but every now and then I am kind of against the idea that you do need to be a tortured soul to make great art, And people often think about people like Baudelaire, other French poets that I can certainly name. I forgot his name. But you probably know who I'm talking about if the name is going to be helpful to you at all. There's this movie, Enchanted. It's a Disney movie. I've been thinking about it again because a friend of mine really liked it. But my favorite scene in the movie is just, it's just kind of a nice family dinner. Just a family having dinner, no real conflict or anything like that. And I honestly really enjoy watching that sort of thing. I don't think that it's necessary to have something horrible happen. I don't even know if having something horrible happen would add anything to it. Yes, I do like watching horrible things sometimes. But it just kind of makes me happy to watch this nice family dinner.